The autumn evening cast a golden glow over Manhattan's Upper East Side as Marcus Reeves adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of his restaurant's front window. Aurelio's had been his dream for 15 years, a culminated vision of Italian-American fusion cuisine that had earned him a Michelin star just 8 months prior. Tonight, like every Friday night, the reservation book was completely full. Table 12 just arrived, whispered Sophia, his head hostess, her dark eyes flickering with something Marcus couldn't quite read. Concern? Warning? And? Marcus raised an eyebrow, checking his watch. 7:47 p.m. Right on time. It's the Sterlings, Sophia said, her voice dropping even lower. Victoria and Christopher Sterling. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd heard the name before, who hadn't? Christopher Sterling was a hedge fund manager worth an estimated $340 million, and his wife Victoria was a socialite who'd made headlines more for her charitable galas than her actual charity. They were the kind of couple who appeared in the society pages of the Times, always photographed at exclusive events, always perfectly coiffed, always radiating that particular brand of wealth that made ordinary people feel invisible. Did they have a reservation? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophia shook her head. They just walked in, said they expected accommodation. Marcus took a deep breath, smoothed down his chef's coat, and stepped into the dining room. Aurelio's was designed to impress, exposed brick walls adorned with contemporary Italian art, Edison bulbs casting warm pools of light over tables dressed in crisp white linens, and the open kitchen where diners could watch the culinary ballet unfold. Every table was occupied, the murmur of conversation mixing with the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. At the host's stand stood Christopher and Victoria Sterling. Christopher was tall, probably 6'3", with silver hair that looked professionally styled even at this hour. His suit was definitely bespoke. Marcus had learned to recognize the cut of true luxury, probably worth more than most people's monthly rent. His watch caught the light, a Patek Philippe that Marcus estimated cost around $80,000. Victoria was everything the tabloids had portrayed, blonde hair falling in perfect waves past her shoulders, wearing a dress that was simultaneously elegant and calculated to attract attention. Her jewelry sparkled with what Marcus suspected were actual diamonds, not the cubic zirconia most people wore. She held a small Hermes clutch in one hand and had the posture of someone who'd never doubted their place in the world. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, Marcus said, approaching with his most professional smile. Welcome to Aurelio's. I'm Marcus Reeves, the owner and head chef. Christopher barely glanced at him. We need a table for two. Immediately. I'm terribly sorry, but we're completely booked tonight, Marcus explained, gesturing to the full dining room. If you'd like, I can add you to our waiting list, or I'd be happy to make a reservation for you for tomorrow evening. Do you know who I am? Christopher's voice cut through Marcus's words like a knife through butter. Marcus maintained his composure. Yes, sir, I do. However, we have guests who made reservations weeks in advance. I don't care about your other guests, Victoria interrupted, her voice carrying that particular tone of dismissal that comes from years of never being told no. We're here now, and we want a table. Surely you can move some people around. Sophia appeared at Marcus's elbow, her presence a silent support. Behind them, Marcus noticed several diners had stopped their conversations to watch the scene unfolding. Mrs. Sterling, I understand your frustration, but it wouldn't be fair to the guests who planned ahead. Fair? Christopher laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me explain something to you, Mr. Reeves. I make more money in an hour than you probably make in a year. When someone like me wants to dine at an establishment like this, accommodations are made. That's how the world works. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. That may be how some establishments operate, sir, but Aurelio's treats all guests equally. If you'd like to make a reservation. This is ridiculous, Victoria said, pulling out her phone. Christopher, let's just go to La Bernardine. At least they understand the importance of certain clientele. Not yet, Christopher said, his eyes narrowing at Marcus. I want to make something very clear to Mr. Reeves here. In this city, reputation is everything. And I have the power to ensure that nobody worth knowing ever sets foot in this establishment again. The threat hung in the air. Several nearby diners had now fully turned to watch, their dinners forgotten. Marcus could see Sophia's hand trembling slightly as she held the reservation book. Sir, I understand you're upset, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. but threatening my business won't change our policy. Every person who's dining here tonight made a reservation and deserves to enjoy their evening without being displaced. I'm sure you can understand that. What I understand, Christopher said, his voice rising, is that you're making a very serious mistake. Do you have any idea how many influential people I know? How many restaurant investors I'm connected with? One call from me, and Christopher, please. A new voice entered the conversation. An elderly woman from a nearby table had stood up. She was elegantly dressed, probably in her 70s, with pearl earrings and an air of old money that even the Sterlings couldn't match. You're making a scene. Mrs. Pemberton, Christopher said, and for the first time, Marcus detected a note of uncertainty in his voice. I didn't see you there. Clearly, Mrs. Pemberton said dryly. Otherwise, you might have thought twice about this display. Young man, she turned to Marcus. Is there truly no availability? I'm afraid not, ma'am, Marcus replied. We're fully booked until closing. Mrs. Pemberton nodded. Then that's that. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, perhaps you should try that new place in Tribeca. I hear they're more flexible with their policies. The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. Christopher's face had gone red, and Victoria looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. This isn't over, Christopher said to Marcus, his voice low and threatening. You'll regret this. As the couple turned to leave, Victoria deliberately bumped into Sophia, causing the reservation book to fall to the floor. She didn't apologize, didn't even look back. The restaurant door closed behind them with a sharp click. The dining room was silent for a moment. Then gradually conversation resumed. Mrs. Pemberton caught Marcus's eye and gave him a small nod of approval before returning to her table. That was intense, Sophia whispered, bending to pick up the reservation book. Yeah, Marcus agreed, his heart still pounding. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of them. He had no idea how right he was. The setup. 3 weeks passed. Marcus almost forgot about the Sterling incident, almost. The restaurant continued to thrive. The reviews remained glowing and reservations stayed solidly booked. But on a Tuesday afternoon, as Marcus was reviewing supplier invoices in his small office, Sophia knocked on his door with an unusual expression. We just got a call, she said. Someone wants to book the entire restaurant for a private event next month, November 15th. Marcus looked up from his paperwork. Private events were lucrative but complicated. They required closing the restaurant to regular diners, specialized menus, extra staff. How many people? 50. They're offering $25,000 for the evening, plus the cost of food and beverages. Marcus whistled. That was significantly above their usual rate. Who's the client? They wouldn't give a name. Said it's a surprise anniversary party and wanted to keep it confidential. But they're sending a representative tomorrow to discuss details. Ems Blackwell. Something about this felt off, but Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on it. $25,000 was hard to turn down, especially with the holidays coming up and some expensive equipment repairs needed in the kitchen. All right, he said finally. Set up the meeting for 2 p.m. tomorrow. I'll make sure we're prepared with menu options. The next day, Veronica Blackwell arrived exactly at 2 p.m. She was in her mid-40s, wearing an immaculate navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio. Everything about her screamed professional event planner, efficient, detail-oriented, no nonsense. Mr. Reeves, thank you for meeting with me, she said, shaking his hand with a firm grip. I'm here on behalf of a client who wishes to host a very special event at your establishment. They sat at a corner table, and Veronica laid out her portfolio. My client is planning a surprise 25th wedding anniversary celebration for a couple who are very influential in New York society. 50 guests, all prominent members of the business and social community. They want only the finest, your best dishes, premium wine pairings, impeccable service. That sounds wonderful, Marcus said, already mentally planning the menu. What date were you thinking? November 15th. I know it's short notice, but my client is prepared to compensate appropriately. As I mentioned to your hostess, we're offering $25,000 for the venue, separate from food and beverage costs. We estimate the total budget will be around $50,000. Marcus did quick math. That was more than they'd typically make on a busy weekend. And your client is? Confidential, I'm afraid. They want it to be a complete surprise. Even the couple being celebrated won't know until they arrive. Veronica smiled. I can tell you that these are very important people, and this event could lead to significant opportunities for Aurelio's. Many of the guests are restaurant investors and food critics. There it was again, that slight feeling of unease. But Marcus pushed it aside. This was a legitimate business opportunity, and Veronica seemed entirely professional. "I need to close the restaurant to regular diners that evening," Marcus said. "That's a significant loss of revenue, but the $25,000 would more than compensate." "Exactly. And think of the exposure," Veronica added. 50 of New York's elite, all experiencing your cuisine simultaneously. The word of mouth alone would be invaluable." Marcus found himself nodding. "All right, let's discuss menu options." They spent the next 2 hours going over details. Veronica wanted a 7-course tasting menu, each course perfectly paired with wines. She had specific requests: no shellfish due to allergies, several vegetarian options, a show-stopping dessert. She asked about table arrangements, decorations, music. "My client wants elegance, but not ostentation," Veronica explained. "Think refined celebration rather than gaudy display." Marcus appreciated that. It aligned with Aurelio's aesthetic. By the end of the meeting, they'd sketched out the entire event. Veronica provided a deposit check for $10,000, made out from something called Sterling Entertainment LLC. Marcus paused, the check in his hand. "Sterling Entertainment?" "My client's event planning company," Veronica said smoothly. "Standard business practice to run expenses through an LLC for tax purposes." It was a common name. It couldn't be. But no, the Sterlings wouldn't go through this elaborate setup just for revenge. That would be insane. Marcus signed the contract. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into planning. He worked with his sous chef to perfect each course, tested wine pairings, arranged for additional servers. Sophia hired 2 extra hostesses for the evening. Everything had to be perfect. 3 days before the event, Veronica came by again. "Small change," she said. "My client wants to add a special element. At the end of dinner, they'd like you to personally present the bill to the couple being celebrated. It's meant to be a joke, a fun moment before revealing that everything's already been paid for." "That seems like an odd request," Marcus said. "It's a running joke among their friend group," Veronica explained. "Something about always arguing over who pays for dinner. Trust me, they'll find it hilarious." Marcus shrugged. "If that's what the client wants." "Perfect." "Oh, and the couple's names, Christopher and Victoria Sterling." Marcus's blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, what?" "Christopher and Victoria Sterling. They're the guests of honor." Veronica's expression remained neutral, professional. "Is there a problem?" Marcus's mind raced. This was a setup. It had to be. But what kind of setup? What was the endgame? He'd signed a contract, taken a deposit, blocked off the evening, ordered specialty ingredients, scheduled extra staff. Backing out now would be a breach of contract, would cost him money he'd already spent preparing. "Mr. Reeves?" Veronica prompted. "No," Marcus said slowly. "No problem. I've met the Sterlings before. They came in a few weeks ago." "Oh, how wonderful," Veronica smiled. "Then you know what important members of the community they are. This event is going to be spectacular. I'll see you on the 15th. After she left, Marcus sat in his office, staring at the contract. Sophia appeared in the doorway. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "We've been set up," Marcus said. "The whole thing, the private event, the big budget, all of it. It's the Sterlings. The couple from, oh no." Sophia's eyes widened. "But why? What's the point?" "I don't know. But I have 3 days to figure it out, or we are walking into whatever trap they've laid." The investigation. Marcus barely slept that night. He kept running through scenarios, trying to figure out what the Sterlings were planning. They'd gone through an elaborate charade to secure a private event at his restaurant, making themselves the guests of honor. Why? What could they possibly gain? The next morning, Marcus did something he'd never done before. He started digging into his clients' backgrounds. A Google search of Christopher Sterling hedge fund yielded pages of results. Christopher was indeed wealthy, but his reputation was complicated. Several articles mentioned lawsuits from former employees, allegations of hostile work environment, settlements that had been sealed. Nothing criminal, but enough to paint a picture of someone who used money and lawyers to get his way. Victoria Sterling had her own digital footprint. Her Instagram was public, thousands of followers watching her curated life of charity galas, exotic vacations, and designer everything. But Marcus noticed something in the comments on older posts. Words like fake, scammer, and tax dodge appeared repeatedly before being deleted. Digging deeper, he found a blog post from 2 years ago written by a former employee of one of Victoria's charities. The post alleged that most of the money raised went to administrative costs, meaning the Sterling's salaries and expenses, with minimal actual charitable work being done. They're not just rich, Marcus told Sophia and his sous chef David as they gathered in the office the next afternoon. They're rich people with a pattern of using their wealth to bully and manipulate. So what's the play here? David asked. He was a practical man, 10 years older than Marcus, who'd been with Aurelio since day one. They book a fake party to humiliate you somehow? Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe they're planning to skip out on the bill. Think about it. They've paid the venue fee, but the food and beverage costs are separate. We're talking about a potential $25,000 to $30,000 tab for 50 people with wine pairings. What if that's their plan? What if they're going to refuse to pay, make a scene, ruin our reputation? Sophia's face had gone pale. Could they do that? Just refuse. They can try, David said grimly. And then what? We call the cops. Drag it through small claims court. Meanwhile, they've got the money for lawyers who can tie us up for years. Marcus stood and began pacing. We need to protect ourselves. First, we're going to require a credit card authorization for the estimated food and beverage costs. Second, we're going to document everything. Every course served, every bottle opened, every interaction. And third, he paused. We're going to be ready for whatever they throw at us. How? Sophia asked. I'm going to call in some favors. Marcus spent the next day reaching out to his network. First, he called his lawyer, explaining the situation. The lawyer advised getting the credit card authorization, but also suggested having a notary present to document the event if things went sideways. Marcus hired one. Next, he called 3 food critics he'd built relationships with over the years. He didn't tell them about the Sterling situation directly, but he casually mentioned hosting a major private event and that he'd love for them to stop by for a drink afterward, around 10 p.m. All 3 agreed. Finally, he called Javier, a freelance photographer who specialized in food and events. I need you there the whole night, Marcus said. Every course, every moment, everything documented. This sounds intense, Javier said. What's going on? Insurance, Marcus replied. Just trust me. On the morning of November 15th, Marcus arrived at Aurelio's at 6 a.m. The restaurant had been transformed. White roses adorned every table. Golden candlesticks provided elegant lighting. And the menu had been printed on heavy cardstock with the Sterling's names embossed at the top, a touch Veronica had requested. David and the kitchen staff arrived at 8 a.m. to begin prep. Sophia and the extra hostesses came at 2 p.m. to set up. By 5 p.m., everything was perfect. Marcus had never seen the restaurant look more beautiful. At 5:30, Veronica arrived. She walked through the space, nodding approvingly. Excellent work, Mr. Reeves. My clients will be very pleased. About the remaining balance, Marcus said, pulling out a credit card authorization form. We'll need a card on file for the food and beverage costs. Veronica's smile didn't waver. Of course. I have Mr. Sterling's corporate card right here. She handed over an American Express black card. Marcus ran the authorization for $30,000, more than he estimated the tab would be, but he wanted cushion. The authorization went through without issue. Perfect, Marcus said, handing back the card. We're all set. Guests began arriving at 6:30 p.m. Marcus watched from the kitchen as 50 of New York's wealthy elite filed in. He recognized several faces, a Broadway producer, 2 museum board members, a former state senator. Everyone was dressed to the nines, air kissing and laughing, completely unaware they were pawns in whatever game was being played. At exactly 7 p.m., Christopher and Victoria Sterling arrived. Victoria's face was a masterpiece of surprise. Darling, what is all this? She exclaimed, clutching Christopher's arm. Happy anniversary, my love, Christopher said, though Marcus noticed his eyes scanning the room with satisfaction rather than surprise. The performance was flawless. Guests surrounded them, offering congratulations. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, thanking everyone for coming. Christopher gave a short speech about their 25 years together, about love and partnership and gratitude. If Marcus hadn't known better, he would have believed every word. Dinner service began. Marcus and David had outdone themselves. First course, a delicate hamachi crudo with citrus and edible flowers. Second course, burrata with heirloom tomatoes and aged balsamic. Third course, house-made pappardelle with wild mushroom ragu. Each course was paired with carefully selected wines, each bottle opened at the table and presented for approval. Javier moved through the room, capturing everything. Marcus made sure each bottle of wine was photographed before service. The sommelier kept meticulous notes on a clipboard, table numbers, wine selections, bottle counts. By the time they reached the fifth course, a perfectly cooked ribeye with truffle potato puree, Marcus had begun to relax slightly. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe this was just a legitimate event, and his paranoia had gotten the better of him. That's when everything went wrong. The trap springs. The sixth course had just been cleared, a palate-cleansing sorbet with Prosecco, when Christopher Sterling stood up and tapped his wine glass with a fork. The dining room fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "Victoria and I are touched beyond words by this celebration. The food has been exceptional, the service impeccable, and the company." He paused, smiling at the assembled guests. "Well, you're all the reason we've stayed in this wonderful city all these years." Polite applause. Victoria was still seated, dabbing at her eyes again. "But before we move to dessert," Christopher continued, "I'd like to address something that's been on my mind. Marcus Reeves, could you come out here, please?" Marcus's stomach dropped. This was it. Whatever they'd planned. He smoothed his chef's coat and walked into the dining room. All 50 guests were watching him. "Mr. Reeves," Christopher said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "you've created a magnificent meal tonight. Truly, one of the best dining experiences we've ever had." "Thank you, sir," Marcus said cautiously. "Which is why what I'm about to do is so difficult," Christopher continued. "You see, everyone here represents the highest echelon of New York society. Museum donors, theater patrons, business leaders. People who value integrity, respect, and proper conduct." Marcus's heart was pounding now. Where was this going? "And I think it's important that everyone knows about an incident that occurred at this very restaurant several weeks ago," Christopher said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "My wife and I came here hoping to enjoy a quiet dinner, but we were publicly humiliated by Mr. Reeves here, who refused to seat us despite this restaurant being half empty." That was a lie. The restaurant had been completely full. But Marcus didn't interrupt. He made it very clear, Christopher continued, that he didn't consider us worthy of his establishment, that he valued his policy over accommodating guests who could have brought significant business his way. Several guests were now murmuring to each other. Marcus could see confusion and disapproval spreading across faces. "Now, I'm a forgiving man," Christopher said, pacing slightly as he spoke. "My wife and I, we believe in second chances. So we arranged this event, giving Mr. Reeves an opportunity to prove himself, to show that he can rise to the occasion when serving the right clientele." The way he said right clientele made Marcus's skin crawl. "And he has risen to the occasion," Christopher admitted. "This meal has been exceptional. But here's my question for everyone here." He turned to face his guests. "Should we reward a restaurant that discriminates based on social status? Should we pay for service that was only excellent because the owner knew important people would be watching?" The murmurs grew louder. Marcus could see people pulling out their phones. This was about to go viral. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I think you're misrepresenting what happened." "Am I?" Christopher cut him off. "You refused to seat my wife and me. That's a fact. You claimed the restaurant was full, but you could have accommodated us. You chose not to." "Because we were genuinely fully booked," Marcus explained, addressing the room now. Every table had been reserved weeks in advance. It wouldn't have been fair to the guests who'd planned ahead to displace them for a walk-in, regardless of who that walk-in was. "See?" Christopher said triumphantly. "Even now, he admits it. He values his policy over his guests." Victoria stood up, joining her husband. "This whole evening has been wonderful," she said, her voice quivering with practiced emotion. "But it's all tainted by knowing that the man who created it sees us, and by extension, all of you, as nothing more than dollar signs. Money to be extracted, not guests to be valued." It was a masterful performance, Marcus had to admit. She'd flipped the entire narrative. Instead of them being entitled walk-ins who demanded special treatment, she'd made Marcus the villain, someone who only cared about money. Which brings me to this moment, Christopher said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. Mr. Reeves, I believe this is where you were instructed to present us with a bill for this evening? Marcus suddenly understood. This was the real trap. If he presented the bill as planned, Christopher would refuse to pay, claiming it was the final insult, asking them to pay after how they'd been treated. The entire room would witness it, 50 influential people who'd spread the story far and wide. And if Marcus tried to force payment, he'd look even worse, like a money-grubbing owner harassing guests. But Marcus had prepared for this. Actually, sir, Marcus said calmly, there's no need for that. The bill has already been settled. Christopher's expression flickered. Just for a moment, Marcus saw frustration and surprise. Excuse me? When Ems Blackwell booked this event, we required a credit card authorization for all food and beverage costs, Marcus explained. That authorization was processed this afternoon. Everything has been paid for, including a 20% gratuity for the staff. He could see Christopher calculating, trying to find another angle. But Marcus wasn't finished. However, since you've brought up the incident from several weeks ago in front of all these guests, I think it's only fair to provide the full context. Marcus pulled out his phone and connected it to the restaurant's sound system. With your permission, I'd like to play security footage audio from that evening. That's hardly necessary, Christopher began. I think it is, said a voice from the back. Mrs. Pemberton, who Marcus now realized had been invited to this event, stood up. I was here that night, Christopher. I witnessed what happened. Perhaps everyone should hear the truth. Christopher's face had gone red, but he was trapped. Refusing now would look like he had something to hide. Marcus played the audio. The restaurant fell silent as Christopher's voice filled the space. Do you know who I am? I make more money in an hour than you probably make in a year. When someone like me wants to dine at an establishment like this, accommodations are made. That's how the world works. Victoria's voice followed. Let's just go to La Bernardine. At least they understand the importance of certain clientele. And finally, Christopher's threat. I have the power to ensure that nobody worth knowing ever sets foot in this establishment again. One call from me, and the audio stopped. The silence in the room was deafening. The truth revealed. Marcus looked around at the 50 assembled guests. The expressions had shifted dramatically. Confusion and disapproval had turned to shock and, on some faces, recognition. These were people who'd probably heard Christopher make similar statements before, who'd witnessed his entitlement firsthand but never challenged it. That night, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, this restaurant was completely booked. Not half empty, as Mr. Sterling claimed, completely booked. Every single table had been reserved, some as much as 6 weeks in advance. I couldn't accommodate the Sterlings without displacing guests who'd planned their evening around dining here. He turned to face Christopher directly. I treated you exactly as I would treat anyone who walked in without a reservation when we're fully booked. I was polite. I offered alternatives. I offered to make a reservation for another evening. But that wasn't good enough for you, was it? Christopher's jaw was clenched, but he didn't respond. So you created this elaborate setup, Marcus continued. You hired an event planner, used a shell company to hide your identity, booked a fake anniversary party. Also, you could engineer a situation where you could humiliate me in front of 50 influential people. That's not, Victoria started, but Mrs. Pemberton interrupted. Oh, but it is, dear, the elderly woman said, standing up. I've known the Sterling family for 30 years. I watched Christopher grow up, and I am ashamed to say I've watched him become exactly the kind of man his father warned him not to be, someone who uses money as a weapon, who views every interaction as a transaction he must win. She walked slowly to the center of the room, commanding attention despite her age. That night I was here, I saw the entire incident. Christopher and Victoria were rude, entitled, and threatening. Marcus handled the situation with far more grace than it deserved. And when I intervened, they left. I thought that was the end of it. She turned to Christopher. You couldn't let it go, could you? You couldn't accept that your money doesn't entitle you to special treatment, that there are still places in this city where everyone is valued equally. Mrs. Pemberton, with all due respect, Christopher began. Respect, she laughed. But there was no humor in it. You don't know the meaning of the word. You invited all these people here tonight, friends, colleagues, people who've supported your various ventures, and you plan to use us as props in your petty revenge scheme. Veronica Blackwell, who'd been standing near the kitchen entrance, was edging toward the door. Marcus caught Sophia's eye and nodded. Sophia positioned herself to block the exit. Ms. Blackwell, Marcus called out. Before you leave, perhaps you could tell everyone here about your role in this? All eyes turned to the event planner. She looked like she wanted to disappear. I was hired to book an event, she said defensively. I didn't know about any personal issues. Really? Marcus pulled out his phone again. So when you told me that presenting the bill directly to the Sterlings was a running joke among their friend group, that was just a coincidence? Veronica's face had gone pale. I was instructed to set me up to look like a greedy restaurant owner trying to extract money from guests I'd previously snubbed, Marcus finished. Except I'm curious about one thing. Mr. Sterling, you knew I'd require a credit card authorization for a bill this size. You had to know I wouldn't actually present a bill for an unpaid amount. So what was the real plan? Christopher remained silent, but Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes. I think I know, said a voice from one of the tables. A man in his 50s stood up. Marcus recognized him as Daniel Ashford, a prominent restaurant investor. You were going to dispute the charges, weren't you? Claim the service was subpar, that you were coerced, that the authorization was fraudulent. With all of us as witnesses to your story about being discriminated against, you'd have a case for your credit card company to reverse the charges. Christopher's silence was confirmation enough. And meanwhile, Ashford continued, the story would spread through social media and the press. Rich couple scammed by discriminatory restaurant. It would ruin Marcus's reputation, probably force him to close. All because he had the audacity to treat you like everyone else. The room erupted in conversation. Several guests were now standing, some looking angry, others simply shocked. Marcus noticed phones coming out. But this time, people were recording Christopher and Victoria, not him. This is insane, Victoria said, her voice rising. We're the victims here. We were publicly humiliated. You were politely told there were no tables available. Mrs. Pemberton cut her off. And you threatened to destroy this man's livelihood. And when that didn't work, you hatched the scheme. How is that victimhood, Victoria? One of the other guests, a woman Marcus didn't recognize, stood up. I'm Emily Thornton with the New York Times Society desk. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, would you care to comment on what appears to be a coordinated attempt to defame a local business owner? Christopher's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This dinner is over, he announced. Everyone out. Now. Actually, Marcus said calmly, this is my restaurant. And dinner isn't quite over, we still have dessert. He nodded to David, who'd been watching from the kitchen entrance. David disappeared and returned moments later with the pastry chef and 3 other servers, all carrying plates of the final course, a deconstructed tiramisu with espresso gelato and amaretto cream. Everyone please sit down, Marcus said. You came here for an anniversary celebration, and while the circumstances are unusual, you shouldn't miss dessert. It's quite spectacular. There was a moment of uncertainty. Then Mrs. Pemberton began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, but grew into full, genuine laughter. Oh, what the hell, she said, sitting back down. I did dress up for this. Might as well enjoy the dessert. One by one, the other guests sat back down. The servers moved through the room, placing dessert plates with practiced precision. The sommelier poured dessert wines. Normal service resumed as if nothing had happened, except for Christopher and Victoria Sterling, who remained standing in the middle of the room, looking increasingly isolated. You can't just, Christopher sputtered. This is... What? Marcus asked. Treating your guests with respect. Providing the service you paid for? Or are you upset that your plan failed? Victoria grabbed Christopher's arm. Let's just go, she hissed. Yes, do go, Mrs. Pemberton said, not looking up from her dessert. You've already embarrassed yourselves enough for one evening. The Sterlings left. The door closing behind them felt like the end of a storm passing. The restaurant was silent for a moment. Then conversation resumed. But this time, it was different. People were talking about what had just happened, but also about the food, the wine, the experience. Marcus returned to the kitchen, where his entire staff was waiting. Holy shit, David said. Did that really just happen? It really just happened, Marcus confirmed, feeling the adrenaline starting to wear off. His hands were shaking. Sophia appeared in the doorway. Marcus, you need to come back out here. The guests are asking for you. With some trepidation, Marcus returned to the dining room. To his surprise, All 48 remaining guests stood and began to applaud. It started slowly, then built into genuine, enthusiastic applause. Mrs. Pemberton raised her dessert wine glass. To Marcus Reeves and Aurelio's, where everyone is treated equally and excellence is never compromised. The toast was echoed around the room. Marcus felt tears pricking at his eyes. Emily Thornton approached him. Mr. Reeves, I'd love to do a full interview about what happened tonight. This is exactly the kind of story our readers need to hear. Small business owners standing up to wealth and entitlement. Before Marcus could respond, Daniel Ashford joined them. And I'd like to talk to you about investment opportunities. What you did tonight, that takes integrity. That's the kind of person I want to be in business with. As the evening wound down, Marcus found himself surrounded by guests wanting to thank him, to exchange business cards, to make future reservations. The disaster the Sterlings had tried to engineer had instead become the best publicity Aurelio's could have asked for. The aftermath. The next morning, Marcus woke up to his phone buzzing incessantly. Text messages, emails, social media notifications. They were multiplying faster than he could check them. He barely slept, his mind replaying the events of the previous evening on an endless loop. The first thing he did was check the major news sites. The story had broken everywhere. The New York Times headline read, "Wealthy couple's revenge plot backfires at Upper East Side restaurant." The article, written by Emily Thornton, detailed the entire evening with quotes from multiple guests. But what really caught Marcus's attention was the sidebar, a deeper investigation into Christopher Sterling's hedge fund and Victoria Sterling's charitable foundation. The reporters had found the same red flags Marcus had discovered, and more. The Post had gone tabloid spectacular. Sterling's silver tongue. Rich couple's elaborate restaurant revenge scheme exposed. Their article focused on the audio recording, with a complete transcript of Christopher's threats. Social media was even more intense. The hashtag #SterlingScandal was trending on Twitter. Someone had posted Javier's photos from the evening, not just of the food, but of the confrontation. Christopher's red face, Victoria's shocked expression, the guests standing to applaud Marcus. Sophia called at 7:30 a.m. "Have you seen the news?" "I'm looking at it now," Marcus said, scrolling through his phone. "It's everywhere." "Marcus, we have a problem. A good problem, but still a problem. The reservation line has been ringing nonstop since 6 a.m. We're booked solid for the next 3 months, and people are offering ridiculous amounts to get tables." Marcus sat up. 3 months? And that's just what we could physically answer. The voicemail is full, the email inbox is overflowing, and someone's trying to book tables via Instagram DM. Marcus got dressed quickly and headed to the restaurant. When he arrived at 9 a.m., there was a line of people outside. Not a line to get in. The restaurant didn't open until 5 p.m., but a line of people hoping to make reservations, to see the place that had stood up to the Sterlings, to be part of the story. Inside, the staff had already gathered. David, Sophia, the servers, even the dishwashers, everyone was there, trying to process what had happened. "Guys," Marcus said, "I know this is overwhelming. I never intended for any of this to blow up this way. If anyone wants to opt out, if this attention is too much." "Are you kidding?" One of the servers, Angela, interrupted. "Marcus, do you know how many restaurants I've worked at where the owners would have caved to people like the Sterlings? Where money talks and regular people get treated like garbage." "She's right," David added. "What you did last night, that's why we work here. That's why Aurelio's is different." Sophia pulled up her laptop. "I've been going through the reservation requests. There are some interesting ones. Daniel Ashford wants to bring a group of investors for dinner next week. Mrs. Pemberton has requested a standing reservation for Thursday evenings. And get this, Le Bernardin's head chef wants to come eat here." "Wait, what?" Marcus couldn't believe it. He sent a personal email. Said he's wanted to try your food for months, but couldn't get a reservation. After reading about last night, he wanted to support a fellow chef who remembers what hospitality actually means. Marcus felt overwhelmed. This was success beyond anything he'd imagined, but it had come from such a twisted situation. His phone rang. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Mr. Reeves? This is Catherine Morrison from Good Morning America. We'd like to have you on the show tomorrow morning to discuss what happened at your restaurant." Marcus's mind raced. National television? I need to think about it. Of course. But I should tell you, We've also reached out to Christopher and Victoria Sterling. They've declined comment, but their publicist has released a statement calling your actions a publicity stunt and threatening legal action. We'd like to give you a chance to respond." After he hung up, Marcus looked around at his staff. "They're threatening to sue." "Let them try," David said grimly. "We have everything documented, the audio, the photos, 48 witnesses, plus their own event planner." "Speaking of Veronica Blackwell," Sophia said, pulling up another email. "She sent this last night. She's offering to testify to whatever we need. Says she's disgusted she was used as part of their scheme." Over the next few days, the story continued to dominate local news and social media. But something else was happening too. Other people were coming forward with their own sterling stories. A former employee of Christopher's hedge fund did an interview describing the toxic work environment, the harassment, the way Christopher used NDAs and settlements to silence complaints. The reporter who'd written about Victoria's charity foundation expanded her investigation, finding that of the $2 million raised last year, only $150,000 had actually gone to the stated causes. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office announced they were looking into potential fraud charges related to the charity. The SEC opened an investigation into Christopher's hedge fund. Lawsuits that had been quietly settled began to resurface as former employees felt emboldened to speak out. The Sterlings tried to fight back. They hired a crisis management firm, released statements claiming they were the victims of a smear campaign, threatened lawsuits against multiple media outlets. Victoria did an interview with a sympathetic society magazine, painting herself as a misunderstood philanthropist and Marcus as an opportunist who'd exploited their attempt to make amends. But it was too late. The narrative had been set, and it wasn't the one they'd wanted. 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus appeared on Good Morning America. He was nervous. National television was far outside his comfort zone, but the interview went well. He spoke about treating all customers fairly, about standing up to bullies regardless of their wealth, about building a restaurant based on quality and integrity rather than social climbing. The segment went viral, of course. More interview requests followed: local news, food magazines, business podcasts. Marcus accepted some and declined others, trying to find a balance between capitalizing on the attention and not becoming defined solely by the Sterling incident. But life at Aurelio's had fundamentally changed. They were now one of the hottest restaurants in New York, with a waiting list that stretched for months. Marcus hired additional staff to handle the volume. David was promoted to executive chef, taking on more of the kitchen management so Marcus could handle the business side that had exploded. One evening in early December, about 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus was doing his usual pre-service walkthrough when Sophia approached him. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says it's important." Marcus stepped into the small waiting area and stopped. Standing there, looking significantly less polished than last time, was Victoria Sterling. She was alone, no designer handbag, no carefully styled hair. She looked tired. "Mrs. Sterling," Marcus said cautiously, "what are you doing here?" "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "In person. Away from lawyers and cameras and all of it." Marcus gestured to one of the chairs. They sat, the space between them heavy with tension. "That night," Victoria continued, "what we did, it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But Christopher was so angry after what he called the embarrassment of being turned away, and She trailed off. "I've spent our entire marriage going along with his schemes, his revenge plots, his petty cruelties. Always telling myself it wasn't that bad, that this was just how wealthy people operated." She looked up at Marcus. "But it was that bad. And when it all came out, when I saw how people looked at us, not with respect or envy, but with contempt and pity, I realized what I'd become." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because you deserve an apology. A real one, not a publicist's written statement. And because—" She hesitated. "I need you to know that not everything coming out about Christopher is exaggerated or a smear campaign. It's all true. The hedge fund practices, the way he treats employees, all of it. I knew, and I said nothing." "Mrs. Sterling." "I'm filing for divorce," she said abruptly. "I've moved out. I'm cooperating with the investigations. I've resigned from the charity board, and I'm working with the state to ensure all funds are properly allocated to actual charitable work." Marcus didn't know what to say. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Victoria continued. "I don't deserve that. I'm just asking for you to know that I understand the damage we caused, and I'm trying to make it right. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, the food that night really was exceptional. Under different circumstances, we could have been regular customers, people you actually enjoyed serving. Instead, we became a cautionary tale. After she left, Marcus sat alone in the quiet restaurant. Sophia appeared in the doorway. Was that really Victoria Sterling? Yeah, Marcus confirmed. She came to apologize. Do you believe her? Marcus thought about it. I think I believe that she's trying to change. Whether she succeeds or not, that's up to her. The reckoning. The holiday season brought even more chaos to Aurelio's. December reservations were impossible to get, and Marcus found himself turning away celebrities, wealthy socialites, and even a few politicians. But he held firm to his principles. Reservations were first come, first served, no exceptions for fame or money. Christopher Sterling, meanwhile, was watching his empire crumble. The SEC investigation found multiple violations of securities regulations. 3 hedge fund clients pulled their money, citing concerns about ethical practices. A class action lawsuit was filed by former employees. Banks that had previously courted his business suddenly found reasons to distance themselves. But the real blow came just before Christmas, when the Manhattan D's office announced fraud charges related to the charity foundation. The evidence was damning. Emails showing Christopher and Victoria had knowingly diverted charitable funds for personal use, falsified tax documents, and used the foundation as essentially a money laundering operation. Marcus read about it in the Times while having his morning coffee at the restaurant. The article included a quote from the DA. This investigation began after information came to light following an incident at a local restaurant. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. You all right? David asked, pouring himself a coffee and sitting across from Marcus. I keep thinking about that night they first came in, Marcus admitted. If I'd just given them a table, if I'd bent the rules that one time, you'd have compromised everything you believe in, David interrupted. And they'd still be out there, bullying restaurant owners and servers, treating people like garbage. What happened to them wasn't because you refused them a table. It was because their entire life was built on corruption and cruelty. Marcus knew David was right, but the weight of it all still felt heavy. The restaurant opened at 5 p.m. as usual. The first seating was full. It always was now, but Marcus noticed something different. The guests weren't just wealthy New Yorkers anymore. There were middle-class families who'd saved up for months to afford the experience, young couples on special dates, international tourists who'd read about the restaurant online. And they were all being treated exactly the same, with respect, excellent service, and the best food Marcus and his team could create. During the dinner service, Sophia pulled Marcus aside. Table 7 wants to speak with you. Marcus went over to find Mrs. Pemberton dining with 3 other elderly women, all clearly old money and social prominence. Marcus, dear, Mrs. Pemberton said, I'd like you to meet the board of the Metropolitan Museum's Patrons Circle. We've been discussing the spring gala, and we'd like Aurelio's to cater it. Marcus blinked in surprise. The Met Gala was one of the most prestigious events in New York. Mrs. Pemberton, I'm honored, but we don't do off-site catering. We'll come here, one of the other women interrupted. The gala will be smaller this year, only 200 people. We can do it over 2 nights if needed. What you've built here, the integrity of it, that's what we want to support. They spent the next hour discussing details. It would be the biggest event Aurelio's had ever handled, but Marcus found himself excited by the challenge. Later that evening, as the final guests were finishing their desserts, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number again. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Reeves? This is Christopher Sterling. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, away from the dining room noise. Mr. Sterling, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I'm calling to. There was a long pause, to tell you that you've won. The charges, the lawsuits, the investigations, my lawyers say there's no way out. I'm going to prison probably for a long time. Marcus didn't say anything. I've lost everything, Christopher continued, his voice hollow. My business, my reputation, my marriage. All because I couldn't let go of being told no for the first time in my life. Mr. Sterling. Don't, Christopher interrupted. Don't offer me comfort or understanding. That's not why I called. I called because I wanted you to know something. What happened to me, what I did to myself, I deserved all of it. But you did something I've never been able to do. You stood up for your principles even when it would have been easier to compromise them. That takes a kind of strength I've never had. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Christopher spoke again. Take care of that restaurant, Mr. Reeves. It's something real in a city full of pretenders. He hung up before Marcus could respond. Marcus stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, processing the call. David found him there a few minutes later. You look like you've seen a ghost, David said. Maybe I have, Marcus replied. The ghost of who I could have become if I'd made different choices. New Year's Eve at Aurelio's was completely booked, of course. Marcus and his team had prepared a special tasting menu for the occasion, 10 courses, each more elaborate than the last, with wine pairings and a champagne toast at midnight. As midnight approached, Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his dining room full of happy people. Some were wealthy, some weren't. Some were local regulars, some were first-timers. But they were all there because they wanted to be, because they'd made reservations, because they appreciated what Aurelio's represented. When the countdown started, 10, 9, 8, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him here. The years of culinary school, the restaurant jobs working his way up, the risk of opening his own place, the struggle to build a reputation. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. The dining room erupted in cheers, champagne corks popping, couples kissing, friends embracing. Sophia appeared at Marcus's side. We did it, she said. A whole year of this craziness, and we made it. We did more than make it, Marcus said, watching his guests celebrate. We built something that matters. The next morning, New Year's Day, Marcus arrived at the restaurant early. The dining room was quiet, clean and reset from the previous night's celebration. He walked through the space, running his hand along the bar, checking the table settings, adjusting a slightly crooked picture frame. This was his place. Not because he owned it, but because he'd fought for it, stood up for it, refused to compromise what it represented. His phone buzzed. An email from Emily Thornton at the Times. Mr. Reeves thought you should know. Christopher Sterling pleaded guilty this morning to all charges. 8 to 12 years in federal prison. Victoria Sterling's cooperation with prosecutors means she'll likely avoid prison time, but will have to pay significant restitution. The Sterling scandal is officially over. Happy New Year, Emily. Marcus read the email twice, then deleted it. The Sterling scandal might be over, but Aurelio's story was just beginning. Moving forward. Spring arrived in New York with that particular kind of optimism that only comes after a hard winter. Cherry blossoms bloomed in Central Park. The days grew longer, and Aurelio settled into a new normal, still busy, still prestigious, but no longer defined by scandal. The Met Gala catering went perfectly. Over 2 nights in April, Marcus and his team served 200 of New York's cultural elite, and the reviews were spectacular. More importantly, it established Aurelio's as more than just that restaurant from the Sterling scandal. It was now recognized as one of the city's premier dining establishments. Marcus hired 2 more chefs, expanded the wine cellar, and even opened a small private dining room for intimate gatherings. He'd been approached by investors wanting to help him open a second location, maybe even a chain, but he declined. Aurelio's worked because it was personal, because he could maintain the standards and values that had made it special in the first place. One Thursday evening in May, Marcus was reviewing next week's menu when Sophia knocked on his office door. You have a visitor, she said. She doesn't have a reservation, but she's asking to speak with you. Marcus looked up. Who is it? Victoria Sterling. Marcus hadn't seen or heard from Victoria since her apology months ago. The news reports said she'd been cooperating with prosecutors, had paid back millions to the charity, and was doing community service. But she'd stayed completely out of the public eye. Send her in, Marcus said. Victoria looked different. Her hair was simpler, her clothes nice, but not ostentatious. She carried herself with less of that entitled posture, more with the bearing of someone who'd been humbled by life. Mr. Reeves, thank you for seeing me, she said, sitting across from his desk. I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. I didn't think you were, Marcus said. How are you doing? Better than I deserve to be, she admitted. I've been volunteering at a soup kitchen in Queens. My lawyer thought it would look good for the courts, but honestly, it's been eye-opening. Seeing how most people live, how hard they work for so little. I never understood that before. What brings you here today? Victoria pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this. It's a check for $50,000. I know the publicity from our incident probably helped your business, but you also incurred costs, legal fees, the stress, everything. This is just to make sure you're not out anything because of what we did." Marcus looked at the check, but didn't take it. "Mrs. Sterling, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept this." "Please," she said. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need to make amends where I can." "Then donate it to a food bank," Marcus suggested, "or a culinary school scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Do something that helps people who actually need it." Victoria nodded slowly. "You're right. I'm sorry. I should have thought of that." She stood to leave, then paused. "Can I ask you something? That night, when Christopher and I first came here and you turned us away, did you know who we were?" "I did," Marcus admitted. "But you still said no." "I would have said no to anyone in the same situation," Marcus explained. "That's the point. Being rich doesn't make you more deserving of a table than someone who works 2 jobs and saves for months to afford a nice dinner." "I wish I'd understood that then," Victoria said quietly. "Maybe things would have turned out differently." After she left, Marcus sat for a long time thinking about second chances, about redemption, about the choices that define who we become. That evening service was typical for Aurelio's now, busy but controlled, excellent food served to appreciative guests. Marcus made his rounds through the dining room, stopping at tables to check on diners, accepting compliments, answering questions about dishes. At one table, a young couple was clearly on a special date. The woman kept looking around the restaurant with wide eyes, taking photos of each course. When Marcus stopped by their table, she practically bounced in her seat with excitement. "This is amazing," she exclaimed. "We've been saving up for 6 months to come here. It's our anniversary, and after reading about what happened with those rich people, we knew we had to support your restaurant." "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "But I hope you're here because you enjoy the food and the experience, not just because of the scandal." "Oh, absolutely," the young man said. "But it matters that you stood up for regular people like us. It matters that you didn't let money and power push you around." After they left, Sophia showed Marcus their credit card receipt. They'd left a 35% tip, probably more than they could really afford, with a note. "Thank you for showing us that integrity still means something." Marcus added his own money to increase their tip to what they'd actually left. Then had Sophia mail them a gift certificate for a free dinner. "You know you can't do that for everyone," David said when he found out. "I know," Marcus replied. "But sometimes you can." As summer approached, the Sterling scandal faded further from the public consciousness. Christopher Sterling was in federal prison in Pennsylvania. Victoria Sterling had quietly moved to a small town in Connecticut, as far from New York society as she could get while still meeting the terms of her plea agreement. The restaurant investors who'd been interested in Christopher's hedge fund had moved on to other opportunities. The charity foundation had been dissolved, its remaining assets distributed to legitimate organizations. The society pages no longer mentioned the Sterling name. Life moved on, as it always does. But Aurelio's remained. And every night, Marcus and his team served excellent food to people from all walks of life, treating everyone with the same respect and care. Because that's what hospitality means, not catering to the wealthy and powerful, but creating a space where everyone feels valued. One evening in late June, Marcus was closing up when he noticed someone sitting on the bench across the street from the restaurant. An older man, well-dressed but not ostentatious, just sitting and watching. Marcus crossed the street. "Can I help you with something?" The man looked up. "Marcus Reeves? I'm Thomas Sterling, Christopher's father. I wondered if I could have a moment of your time." Marcus's first instinct was to refuse, but something in the old man's expression stopped him. "All right. Would you like to come inside?" They sat at the bar, and Marcus poured them both a glass of wine. "I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand where I went wrong," Thomas said. "How my son became the kind of man who would do what he did. To you, to his employees, to everyone he encountered." "Mr. Sterling, please let me finish," Thomas interrupted gently. "I made my money in real estate, starting with nothing and building it up over 40 years. I thought I was teaching Christopher about business, about success. But I never taught him about character. I never taught him that how you treat people matters more than how much money you make." He took a sip of wine. "I came here tonight because I wanted to see the restaurant that finally held my son accountable. I wanted to meet the man who had the courage to stand up to him when everyone else, including me, just looked the other way. What happened to your son wasn't because I stood up to him, Marcus said. It was because he built his life on a foundation of cruelty and corruption. I know, Thomas agreed. But you were the catalyst. You were the first person who didn't bend. And that started the unraveling. Everything else that came out, it was all true, all things I should have seen and addressed years ago. They talked for another hour. Thomas shared stories of Christopher as a child, bright and curious, but already showing signs of the entitlement that would later consume him. He talked about the guilt he felt, the relationships with his grandchildren that were now strained, the family legacy that had been tarnished. I'm 82 years old, Thomas said as he prepared to leave. I don't have many years left, but I want to spend some of them trying to make amends where I can. I've set up a scholarship fund in your name, $500,000 for culinary students from low-income backgrounds. It won't fix what my son did, but maybe it will help someone else build something good. After Thomas left, Marcus stood alone in his restaurant, looking around at everything he built. The Michelin star plaque on the wall, the photos of satisfied diners, the reservation book filled with names of people excited to experience his food. This was success. Not the kind measured in millions of dollars or social status, but the kind built on integrity, hard work, and treating people with respect. 5 years later, 5 years after the Sterling scandal, Aurelio's was a New York institution. Marcus had opened a second location in Brooklyn, smaller, more casual, but maintaining the same commitment to quality and equal treatment that had made the original famous. David was now a partner in the business. Sophia had moved up to general manager, overseeing both locations. The original staff had grown, but the culture remained the same: excellence without pretension, hospitality without hierarchy. Marcus occasionally did consulting work, helping other restaurant owners navigate difficult situations and maintain their integrity in an industry that often rewarded compromise. He'd written a book about his experiences, though he'd been careful not to make it all about the Sterling scandal. It was really about building a business based on values, about the importance of treating people fairly, about finding success without sacrificing principles. Christopher Sterling was still in prison, with 3 more years on his sentence. Marcus had heard through the grapevine that he'd actually become a model prisoner, teaching business classes to other inmates, learning humility the hard way. Victoria Sterling had rebuilt her life in Connecticut. She ran a small nonprofit now, working with women reentering society after prison, helping them find employment and housing. She'd reached out to Marcus once a year, just to update him on her work and to reiterate her apology. Marcus always responded with encouragement. Everyone deserved a second chance. Mrs. Pemberton still had her standing Thursday reservation. She'd become something of a mentor to Marcus, introducing him to the right people, teaching him how to navigate New York's social world without compromising himself. She told him once, "You reminded me why I fell in love with this city in the first place, because at its best, New York rewards talent and integrity over mere wealth." The restaurant industry had changed too. The Sterling scandal had sparked conversations about how restaurants treated both customers and staff, about the power dynamics inherent in service industry, about standing up to entitled behavior. Several other high-profile incidents had occurred where restaurant owners had refused to bow to wealth and influence, and in each case, the public had supported them. On the 5-year anniversary of that fateful evening, Marcus held a special dinner. He invited everyone who'd been part of the story, the staff who'd supported him, the guests who'd witnessed it, the reporters who'd told the truth, even Veronica Blackwell, the event planner who'd been unwittingly used in the scheme. Mrs. Pemberton stood to make a toast. 5 years ago, we witnessed something special in this room. Not the scandal itself, but what came after, a young chef showing us all that principles matter, that integrity isn't just a word, that success built on respect and fairness is the only success worth having. She raised her glass. To Marcus Reeves and Aurelio's, may you continue to inspire us all. The toast was echoed around the room. Marcus stood, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. "I'm not sure I deserve all this praise," he said. "I just did what felt right. I treated people the way I'd want to be treated. I refused to compromise my values, even when it would have been easier. That shouldn't be remarkable. That should be the standard." "But it is remarkable," David called out, "because plenty of people compromise their values every day. You didn't." That made all the difference. Later, as guests were leaving, a young woman approached Marcus. She looked nervous. "Mr. Reeves? I'm Sarah Sterling, Christopher's daughter." Marcus was surprised. He'd known Christopher and Victoria had children, but they'd been kept completely out of the public eye during the scandal. I'm graduating from culinary school next month, Sarah continued. I wanted you to know that what happened 5 years ago, as terrible as it was, it changed our family. My father's in prison, yes, but he's different now. He's sorry for what he did. And my mother's doing important work. And me. I decided to go into food service because of you. Because you showed me that this industry can be about more than just money and status. She handed him a business card. I'm opening my own place in 6 months. Small, nothing fancy. But I wanted you to know that you inspired me. That the Sterling name doesn't have to be synonymous with cruelty and corruption. It can be about redemption and doing better. After she left, Marcus showed the card to Sophia. What do you think? I think, Sophia said, that your story has a ripple effect you probably never imagined. You thought you were just standing up for your restaurant, but you actually stood up for something much bigger. As Marcus locked up the restaurant that night, he paused to look at his reflection in the front window. Older now, some gray in his hair, smile lines around his eyes from 5 years of success and satisfaction. The rich couple who'd refused to pay for food, who'd schemed and plotted their revenge, had inadvertently given him the greatest gift possible, proof that integrity matters, that standing up for principles has consequences that extend far beyond any single moment. Aurelio's lights went dark, but the lesson remained bright. Treat people with respect, stand up for what's right, and success will follow. Not the cheap, hollow success of money and status, but the real, lasting success of building something meaningful. The Sterling scandal was over, but its impact would echo for years to come, a reminder to everyone that wealth and power have limits, and that sometimes the strongest response to entitlement is simply, firmly saying no. Teach E end.